Good morning, everybody. Is that working? Okay. I'm Reed Broughton. I'm the current chair of the Chamber of Commerce. On behalf of the entire board of directors, I'd like to welcome you to our June Exit Issues on Generations in the Workplace. Today's program will end at 9:30, and we hope to have questions starting probably around 9:20. We want to thank and give a special thank you to our sponsor, Automation Creations, Inc., for investing in this program. And at this time, I would like to introduce Mr. Henry Bass. Henry is the founder and president of Automation Creations, a 24-person custom software development firm in the Corporate Research Center. He is an entrepreneur, Army Reserve retiree, and a civic volunteer and former board chair for the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce. Please welcome Henry to the podium.
Thanks very much, Reed. Appreciate being here. It's always an honor to sponsor the Exit Issues. One of my favorite things. I love that we get the right people in the room and we have great speakers. So I enjoy this a lot. I would recommend Exit Issue if your business is looking for a way to invest in the chamber. With me today is Jim Wires, our CEO for Automation Creations. And in the back I have my son, Ethan Bass, who works for Skyphos Technology. He recently characterized that business as 3D printing really tiny things. And his significant other, Elizabeth, is with us, and she is looking for opportunities in event planning, and I'm embarrassing her now. So if you're interested in an event planner, event manager, she's a recent Roanoke College graduate. But just to tell you a little bit about our company and what we do, we are custom software developers, a bunch of geeks who enjoy code and do essentially anything you want us to do, and ghostwriters for your creative ideas is how I like to say that. 29 years old this month. We do things like property management back-end solutions so that you can not only look for and find a rental property that you're interested in, but that your folks can manage maintenance and collections and lease paperwork, that sort of thing. We do logistics, back-end logistics software work. There was a pharmaceutical company in North Carolina that had a complete white glove logistics network that was recently bought out by UPS, and we did a lot of their back-end database work. The Blacksburg Transit mobile app, we do the back-end for Blacksburg Transit and their databases, as well as the front-end mobile app, so that they know exactly where all their buses are. They can spin up and shut down buses based on demand and save fuel that way. We do quick projects. If you got something in Excel that says this is really tedious and I have to do this over and over, it probably needs to be automated, and one of our developers can help make your life easier. We did that once, and 2 interns got to have a more exciting summer than banging on a spreadsheet. We have our own servers and hosting in multiple locations across the Corporate Research Center so that it's backed up all the time, every night, with the high-speed fiber optic network that's in the park. So we do some hosting and management there. And in the bottom's our team of about 25 employees that we have now. We've also been involved in a peer CEO group. It's been my honor to help moderate and run that for the last 13 years, where CEOs get together for a half a day once a month to do all their strategic thinking. And we enjoy that a lot. We've also, through LX Council, there's a program for your key number 2 person that meets virtually for 3 hours a month and prepares to assume leadership roles. And then the nonprofit that we do is New River Robotics Association. We found it's helpful to grow STEM enthusiasts right here in Montgomery County because there's so many great opportunities, and they're much more likely to stay in this area if they're from this area. So we do that through competitive robotics, software development, and we take a lot of volunteers to run these competitions. And you've got to see one if you've never seen one before, because videos don't do it justice. It's really cool to see a bunch of middle schoolers jumping up and down and cheering for a robot and building that enthusiasm for science, technology, engineering, and math. So with that, let me tell you a little bit about Katie, one of my favorite speakers. She brings her background of sports coaching and business as well. Dynamic speaker, leadership development expert with over 20 years of experience, inspiring leaders and teams to reach their full potential. She draws from a diverse experience in Division I athletics, healthcare, career service, and economic development, with a unique perspective on her work, engaging audiences with high energy and actionable insights. As a certified executive coach and facilitator, Katie specializes in helping leaders get comfortable with the uncomfortable to create momentum, build stronger teams, and drive meaningful change. Please welcome Katie to the podium.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate being here today. I, as Henry mentioned, am a big sports fan. So recently was watching a lot of baseball and softball as we do this time of year. I don't know if you guys joined me, but I started seeing these pop up. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is happening? Anybody see some of these? Anybody see any baseball, softball? And I was like, man, why is the Karate Kid coming back? Like, what happened there? What's going on? Everybody's bringing back the Mr. Miyagi. And so I was around, and they were like, it's not Karate Kid. I was like, what do you mean it's not Karate Kid? So I was around some young people that I have in my life, and I was like, what is this, like, Karate Kid thing they're doing? Like, it's a fairy. Duh, Katie, it's from TikTok, right? So it's not the first time that I've kind of been told that I'm not hip or cool, but it certainly is the most recent time that I was not hip or not cool. And so I bring this up to talk about, right? Insert the eye roll here, right? TikTok again, right? Or if you're a 90s kiddo like myself, talk to the hand because the face don't understand, right? That we all have opportunities and different things in our life where one aspect and one piece that we see means something different to everyone that might be in that room, right? So that, it leads us back to generations at work. And bear with me, the font didn't totally translate, so if some of these are a little wonky, that's all right. Again, that's what we roll with here when we're speaking. So we're going to talk a little bit today about the generations at work, and I hope to really spark some conversation and hear some things a little differently than maybe what we usually hear when we're talking about generations at work. So a little bit about our agenda today. We're going to kind of get into some definitions and data, right? Make sure we're normalizing where we're all coming from. Talk a little bit about some insights and stereotypes, right? We have them. We're going to go ahead and put them out there. Some myths and some challenges as it relates to all the generations. And then lastly, some actions and takeaways. That's what I'm about. I want you to spend your time here to be able to go back and work in your office or with your team today and what you can bring. So let's talk a little bit about definitions and data. So when it relates to generations, there's all kinds of different generational markers out there. So the thing about generations is that there's not one standard across the United States, across the globe, across the country. So I like to use the Pew Research Center data. I think that is kind of a good generalization. And everyone talks about the years they were born. If you have youth sports, right, they talk about like the 2023s, 2024s. I can't follow that. I need to know like where are they now? So I have also shared with the ages right now of the generations. And so we're going to talk about the silent generation, right? They're not old, so don't see that this was a formatting thing. Then I'm not calling everybody old. It's that you are 80 to 96 years old is this silent generation. The baby boomers are 61 to 79 years old, right? I'm not just calling everybody old here. Generation X is born in the 65s to the 80s. They're 45 to 60 years old currently. The millennials, born in 81 to 96, currently around 29 to 44. And then our Gen Z is our youngest generation now in the workplace. They were born usually around 1997. They're current. And then they're they're about 28 to 13. So the alpha is the new generation. We really haven't decided where Gen Z ends and alpha starts yet. So we will see why we describe Generation Alpha. I've also heard they're going to be Generation C for COVID. So we'll see what lands with that alpha generation. But that means right now, currently, there are 5 generations in the workplace, right? So what does that look like? it looks like a lot of chaos and contention sometimes, doesn't it? So when we're looking at the percentages in the workplace, and this was a couple years ago, we can see the different generations and how much of our labor force right now that they make. So they're 2% at the top. Those are our traditionalists, the silent generation. Those are those that are in their 80s, right? Interestingly enough, their percentage in the workplace actually increased during COVID. When we lost some of the boomer generation, when we lost some of the Generation X, their percentage has actually increased again back in the workplace. So those of you that may have boards of supervisors or may have someone that you are talking to that is a little bit above 80, and in our area, that's a lot of our leaders, I'll be totally honest. So we do have still a strong representation from that generation. And then next followed by our boomers, which is about 35% of our population. And then we have, 25% of our population, our Generation X, which is about 33%, our millennials about 35%, and then that Generation Z, which is the fastest growing in the workplace right now, is currently around 5 to 7%. And so what this means is that we have a lot of people with a lot of lived experience in the workplace, and we have a large population that is exiting the workplace with a smaller population that is entering the workplace, right? This is kind of talking about this great tsunami, right? What is going to happen? We know when we think about a tsunami in the workforce, right? When a tsunami happens, there's an earthquake that starts, right? And then we can kind of follow it for the big tsunami wave. That is what is happening right now. The earthquake has shaken. We know that there's going to be a tsunami of workers leaving the workplace, and we do not have enough people to fill that. And that is why generations in the workplace is so important to me, because we have to figure this out while we can still transfer knowledge, while we can still talk about what the workplace looks like, while we can still inspire those that are currently in the workplace. So when we're thinking about workplace, right now, we have about 68% of the population that is in that kind of Generation X and millennials that are now in leadership positions that they've never been in, right? They are leading and they finally got some power, right? Because that big generation ahead of them is finally starting to leave. They've now started to overtake the baby boomer population. So when we think about these populations, what does this look like? We're going to talk about insights and stereotypes that it leads to why we define generations. Generations are not necessarily defined exactly the same. It's not like, okay, you were born this year to this year, and that's going to be a generation. They look at overall, whoever that they are, right, the scope of life events that happened, current economic situations that happened, and they say, okay, this group of people probably had a shared experience. But as we remember those big, huge age gaps, right, there's a very different lived experience from somebody that was born in 1980, that is still technically a millennial, right, and somebody that was born way after the internet and they, in the early 90s, right? So when we think about that, we know that there's already differences. So what we're going to talk about are just general insights and stereotypes as to why the generations landed the way they did. So first, this silent generation, right? These 80 to 96-year-olds. They're usually described as dependable workers, right? This is our World War II generation, right? Like that was one of their biggest life-shaping events, Great Depression, World War II. So they need tactics, work, money is very important, right? And then they want to respect, right, rules and authority because they had to do that. They love themselves a good hierarchy, right? Who's in charge? And then how do I report to them? They also have waited a very, very, very long time, right, 80 years, to be at the top of that hierarchy. So they struggle to let that go, right? These are a lot of still in our workforce, or they're in the workforce not necessarily by choice, but because they've had multiple recessions in their lifetime that they have had to deal with. And then next we have our baby boomers, right? This is probably the generation that most recently has gotten the bad rap. They're stereotyped and described as optimistic sometimes, right? A little overly optimistic. They're hardworking. They're very team-oriented. They really love to compete, and they are workaholics, right? They love to work, and they want to work, and they want to work, and they keep working, right? And this has retirement on their brain, but because they've worked, and their life-shaping events have made them about work, they really are a little bit scared not to do that anymore. And so these are our generation that is kind of a little bit afraid to retire, right? They really don't know what they're going to do. They have a great sense of duty to their companies, and we'll talk a little bit as it relates to kind of their loyalties. So a lot of their life-shaping events, right? The moon landing, the civil rights movement, the JFK assassination, the MLK assassination, the Vietnam War, the women's liberation movement, right? What are some of these things that come in? They are not afraid to challenge authority, right? They watched people challenge authority as they were growing up. And they saw a difference that made. And so the baby boomers are not necessarily scared to challenge authority, but they really enjoy being the authority, right? And that when we get into the stereotypes of boomers, that is the stereotype of the baby boomer generation. And then we have Generation X, right? Generation X was a small generation in compared to the millennials behind them and the baby boomers that were in front of them. So this generation, I like to say, has a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, right? Because they felt not heard, right? They're independent workers. They tend to be more flexible. They tend to be a little standoffish, right? They really respect change. They expect changing the rules. They saw people, the movement of women's liberation, right, in front of them. They see change as an opportunity and not necessarily a threat. Why is that? What were some of their life events, right? They had the energy crisis. They saw people waiting in line to get gas. They had Watergate, so they started not to really necessarily trust everything around them. They saw the AIDS epidemic, the fall of the Berlin Wall. And then this is the first kind of what we call the latchkey generation, right? They had high rates of divorce in families, and also families where both parents got up and went to work. And so this is the stereotype, right, where they came home with their key at 6 and 7 years old in kindergarten, opened the door, and sat by themselves on the couch and watched TV while they were home. Is that probably everyone's experience? No, but that's the kind of stereotype of this latchkey generation, that where one parent wasn't always in the home. And then we get to our millennials, right? So our millennials are now currently 29 to 44 years old. They now have children, but they are perpetually toddlers in the society for some reason, right? We talk about having ball pits for millennials, and these millennials don't know how, right? These millennials are now parents of lots and lots and lots of our children. And so when we think about millennials, they are now 29 to 44 years old. Right? This group is described as determined, right? They're trying to seek order in a world, and we'll talk about why in their life events, right? They really want some meaning in the work that they are doing. They respect autonomy, they respect meaningful work, and they respect fluid work styles. And so that baby boomer that has the come to work, be here, we only work when we're together, let me see the work that you're doing, right? That is not going to gain the most respect in a stereotypical way from the millennial. Their life-shaping events were pretty traumatic, right? They saw the Oklahoma City bombing. This was when school shootings became the norm. They had Hurricane Katrina. All of us experienced 9/11. They experienced it a little bit more in their formative years than some of the other generations. The global economic crisis that then followed 9/11, right? And then most of all, right, Al Gore invented the internet, right? So we saw the internet come in their lifetime. They started as analog kiddos that rode their bikes, that hung out after school, to then they saw the computer enter their house and the to get to the internet, right? They still remember this in this generation. And so our millennials started as analog, ended a little bit more in the digital world, but were not necessarily digital natives, depending on when they were born and what their experience was. And we need to remember where they lived, right? The internet didn't come everywhere the minute it came out, right? It started with NASA, then it got into our houses, right? And then it still took a lot for you to have internet in your home. And then we have Generation Z, right? This is right now, everything's about how are we going to work with Generation Z, right? We have now iterated to this stage. Generation Z right now is being described as about 28 to 13 years old, but they are most likely the ones you are talking to in high schools, colleges, and hiring in the workplace as your new entry-level employees or entry-level workers. So these are the most educated, most diverse generation that we've ever had, right? So when you look at statistically speaking, the race and ethnicity at 21 years old went from about 71% white males at 21 years old to this is about 50% now in Generation Z at 21 years old. And so this is the most diverse generation. They're entrepreneurial mindset. They have a global mindset, right? And they respect the individuality, the creativity, and why? They had some life-shaping events, right? This is the generation that came of age and of working age during the pandemic. They saw we can work from home, right? They saw that we can be productive without being in the office. They got jobs that didn't really have someone supervising over them, and they really have learned the most in their educational process than any of us did. And so when they graduate from their educational system, be it high school or college, they kind of struggle about what the workplace can teach them. Right? And so this generation is a little bit different and challenging. They've also seen that there's a lot of disruption and change and advocacy that you can make from sending a tweet, from posting on Facebook, and they've seen that disruption at their fingertips. They've been able to see movements, they've been able to see change from just your smartphone, right? And so that is kind of defines what this generation is. So let's go back to looking at some of the generation and what this looks like, right? So when we talk about generations, there's kind of a wave of parents and children. Now, it's not always perfectly true, but let's think about it, that the baby boomers are typically the parents of millennials, right? So what happened, about 10 years ago when the millennials entered the workplace, right? Who'd they complain about? What'd we hear all the time? Oh, boomer, right? That's really kind of kids being like, Mom, you're annoying me, right? Then we have Generation X that had Generation Z. Now Generation Z is entering the workplace, and what are they saying? Like, I don't have to listen to you, right? So there is this weave that comes through of the parents, again, this is kind of generalization, of the children that are in the workplace and entering the workplace. Now, every generation had this, right? Every generation had music that was terrible. Every generation had, these kids these days don't know anything about work. You can find Time articles back to when baby boomers were children about there's no way that they have any work ethic anymore with the Industrial Revolution, and they don't know hard work, right? We know that we honestly are always going to think that our way is the way we should do it. And that is natural. That is how we're wired as humans, is to think the way that I do this is the right way. The way that I do this is the best way, right? We want to do that. We want to find similarities. And so that's where the generations in the workplace can sometimes build and gets a little bit magnified when we're stressed, when we're overworked, when we're understaffed. Anyone been like that lately? Yeah, right? And so some of these challenges are a little bit magnified because we don't have the time, the energy, and the empathy to be able to work through the generational differences, right? And so that's what we're going to think about and focus on a little bit later today when we talk about our actions. So let's talk about some myths and then some challenges in these myths. So the myths are some of my most favorite because they do ring true sometime, right? But the silent generation, right? They're technology illiterate, right? They don't know how to use technology. They're super rigid and they resist any kind of change. They're distant and unemotional, right? They never said, I love you as parents. They just cared about feeding us and keeping a roof over our head, right? They're passive and they're overly obedient. Anyone heard some of these myths about these 80 to 90-year-olds? Yeah. So the baby boomers, right? They're out of touch with technology, right? They don't like technology. They defend the status quo. This is how it's always been, right? That's what we think about when we think about a baby boomer. They can't or won't retire, right? We're sitting waiting for the baby boomers to retire so we can take their jobs, right? And take their leadership. And, they ruin the economy, right? Anyone heard that one? Yeah, the boomers came in and took all the money. Not true, right? These are myths that get perpetuated about these generations. And then Generation X, right? So this is our silent generation, our smallest generation, the latchkey generation, if you remember again. They're slackers who hate authority, right? They're cynical, they're detached, they're kind of that forgotten middle child, right? They don't have an impact, and they hate anything corporate, right? This is the generation that brought work-life balance into the workplace a little bit, right? So they wanted to start working, and they wanted to work the way they did. Then the millennials doubled down on that, right? Millennials doubled down on the work-life balance. And so their myths and some of their stereotypes, right, is that they're entitled because they wanted to go to work and go home and not have to work when they went home. Come on, right? They're obsessed with technology. They're obsessed with social media. They're job hoppers, don't have any loyalty. And then my very favorite is that they are in debt because of avocado toast and lattes, right? Not because of student loans and inflation. But we really do perpetuate some of these myths, and they all have some basis behind it. And then we have Generation Z, right? When I think of Generation Z, I think of this, right? We probably all do, right? They're glued to their phones. They can't communicate IRL, anyone IRL, in real life, right? They abbreviate everything, right? They're antisocial, impatient, anxious, depressed, can't handle reality. And then the snowflakes, right? Overly sensitive, right? This is what we think about, and we perpetuate these myths. Are there some truths behind all of these generational myths? Absolutely, right? But we also need to look at some of the truths behind the myths and what lies beneath so that we can connect and create relationships that last, because unfortunately, our future does lie in the hands of those that are behind us. And so we want to make sure that we are leaving our businesses, our knowledge, our communities in the good hands of the future. So why do some of these things happen? So number one, we'll talk about these preferred communication styles. So the silent generation, they prefer face-to-face communication, right, with a personal touch or a handwritten note. Why do we think that is, right? They didn't have 20 million ways to communicate. They still, even in wartime, had to write a letter home, send it away, and wait for a written letter to come back. Of course they prefer it, right? We prefer what we naturally know. They like the personal touch. They are great now. They've evolved to where they were on the phone, but that was their evolution, right? That was an evolution for the silent generation. And then we have our baby boomers, right? Our baby boomers prefer the formal and efficient communication. They also prefer phone or face-to-face, whichever is efficient. So if it's efficient to pick up and call, great. If it's efficient to pop by my office, great. But they prefer that efficient, either face-to-face, phone, and more formal conversation. Generation X wants it to be the most efficient way. And yes, they will include email, phone, and face-to-face, but really they just kind of want to get the job done, right? Our Generation X just kind of wants to, again, this is why they get the stereotype of being aloof and a little standoffish, because they just want to get the job done, tell me what I need to tell me, and go on, right? They were the invention of this meeting could have been an email, right? That's what they want to have. And then we have our millennials, right? Our millennials are a little bit more flexible, right? They started with in real life communication, then they saw email, but email wasn't really that efficient, right? When you had to log in and wait for the phone call to hang up and it kicked you off, right? So when they grew up, email wasn't necessarily the most efficient, but they're okay now with IMs, with text, with written, but they still don't mind face-to-face, right? This is where, us millennial parents will FaceTime, right? Instead of maybe send a text. But we still are evolving from based on what we wanted to do as an elder millennial. And then we have Gen Z, right? They want quick, they want digital, and they want direct. Tell me what you need to tell me. Don't use punctuations in a text. Come on, this isn't an email, right? They will communicate and have entire conversations based on just emojis, based on GIFs, right? We know this. I love this, right? But this is tough when you're talking about transitioning into the workplace. And now we add on top of that this generation transitioned into the workplace during a very turbulent time, including a lot of remote work, a lot of digital transformation, a lot of digital communication, and we have now leaned into being a little bit of a more digital workforce. We're a little bit more of a global workforce. We're a little bit more of a more remote workforce. And so what they naturally were adept at is also what we are leaning into in the workplace. And so they have not been forced the way some of the generations before were forced to step outside your comfort zone and interact and engage in different ways. They interacted and engaged with those other generations in the ways they liked to interact and engage. And so we need to think about and have a little grace for that, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So when you think about these preferred communication styles, a raise of hands where you see this have challenges in your workplace. Anyone see just the communication styles in of itself have challenges? Absolutely, right? This is what's tough. Because remember, the generation before them really liked work-life balance. They want to go to work and they want to come home for work. And now we have a generation that really doesn't care as much about work-life balance. They want the flexibility to work when and where they want. So sending a text at 10 p.m. is no big deal. That creates some hardships, right? And so just your preferred communication style, without normalizing it, without discussing it, can create a lot of resentment and animosity and challenges in the workplace. So, thinking about communication style, we're going to transition now to how the generation looks at loyalty. And in the research of generations, I always think that there's like one thing that if you take it away, you can take this away. And I think loyalty answers a lot of the questions of the myths and stereotypes. So the silent generation, when they think of loyalty, they are loyal to their organization, right? They are going to get a job, they're going to keep a job, they're going to get the 50-year watch, they're going to keep working, they're going to keep working at that organization, and they are going to grow and maintain and be loyal to that organization, historically, sometimes even over their family, right? Because remember what they went through, right? Job security, salary, I've got this. Like that was success. Check the box. I made it. Why would I give that up? So that loyalty is almost always to the organization that they work for. Then we have our boomers. Our boomers came in, our baby boomers came in, and they're like, yeah, I really like the organization, but I really care about my team, right? My loyalty is to my team. I'm going to defend my team. I'm going to make sure we have teamwork together. We're going to be in person. We're going to get to know each other. We're going to work really hard on this team so that our organization can survive. But the main loyalty is to the team. And then we come back to Generation X, right? So now we come down the generation, and their loyalty is kind of to their manager, right? And their personal professional interests. Remember, this is our latchkey generation. This is our generation where divorce became more normal than not normal. And so their relationships and their kind of manager is that relationship that they care the most about. I'm going to report to you. We're going to have some discussions. Yes, we need a team, but I really kind of want to work on my own. And as long as my manager is letting me do that and I have that relationship, then things are copacetic for me. And then we go into the millennials, right? Millennials, remember, are children of the baby boomers. We talked a lot about teamwork growing up in our households, right? Our parents encouraged us to play on a team. Our parents encouraged us to stick with it. You got to have your team. So they have a team mentality, but it's a little bit different in the workplace, right? It is about our colleagues. And so they are really loyal to their colleagues. So when an organization does a colleague wrong, when a team member does a colleague wrong, right? They're not afraid to stand up to that. They will leave an organization because of that, because the loyalty is to the colleague, not the organization, not necessarily the team. And so we sometimes see that come into play. And then we have our Gen Z, right? They came in and they care about the work experience. Gen Z came out when the economy was actually pretty good, right? Gen Z was raised in an era where the economy was pretty good. Salary is not that important to them anymore. They are looking for the work experience. How can you help me? How can I grow? And what my own values are, and how does that match my own values? Here's how we see this play out in the workplace. This generation cares more about social responsibility, social justice, and social issues than any other generation has before it. So if your company doesn't take a stand, or if they get in trouble for showing up to a social justice event, this is a big, big issue right now that we're having, right? We are really seeing a lot of challenges in my work, and I think across the board, of how do organizations show up and support this generation that feels strong about their values, but also be able to understand that organizations are organizations, right? And there's a lot of nuance there, and that's where I see that piece come up a lot in organizations and when we think about Gen Z for their own values. They will read a mission statement before they apply for a job. They will see if that mission statement matches what the organization does. They will look at who donates to what organizations and what causes, and they really do make decisions based on that. When you talk to Gen Zs about what they're looking for when they look for jobs, I was fortunate enough to speak to a college recently, and I said, as you introduce yourself, what's one word you're looking for as you're looking for a job? Salary, not a single time came up. Right? It was workplace autonomy, workplace flexibility, growth, professional development, right? Purpose-driven work, doing work I enjoy, right? They know that they can go be entrepreneurs. And we talked about the fact that this is a generation that feels like they are the most educated. They are the most educated, and they know it. And when they enter the workplace, we are behind what they learned, right? We are not utilizing everything that they learned in school. But what's missing sometimes is the perspective of what every single one of these generations and loyalties bring. And that's what we need. We need perspective across all generations to be able to talk and discuss about why we do the things we do and what that's based on. So, we'll talk a little bit about some actions and some takeaways that we can do. So, when we think about the actions and the takeaways, what if? And as you see, my slides changed here because we're thinking about, what if everything we just talked about, what if it was all a dream, right? And I, again, am a 90s kiddo, so this is what I think of when I think of it was all a dream. What if the generations aren't as big of a deal as we thought? What if that's really the truth? What if all of the generational hype is about the fact that we really struggle to work and have perspective when it's different than ours? What if some of the generations that we talk about are really not generations? What if it's more about life stages? We are having children at a variety of ages. I can go to a wedding, a retirement party, a first birthday party, a baby shower, and a 12-year-old birthday party all in the same day, and all of the friend group can be my exact age, right? We have a variety of life stages. We have people that are not just worried about their children, they're worried about aging parents. We have a generation, we have a life stage of people, right, that have had economic crises, that have had recessions, that have had all of those life-shaping events happen to them within a 10-year period. So what if it's maybe not necessarily about generations? Maybe it's a little bit about more life stages, right? Or what if all these things we talk about are actually self-fulfilling prophecies? There's a story that Gen Z loves knitting again. So Gen Zs love to knit, and they knit now just the way the silent generation knits. So what happens when Gen Zs hear they like knitting? What is knitting now? It's cool. Now, well, I'm going to go try knitting. I'm supposed to like knitting, right? Now we have fulfilled the prophecy that Gen Z likes knitting. Or we talk about how millennials are entitled, and they're like, all right, well, if I'm entitled, I'll be entitled, right? That's fine. We talk about how Generation X has a chip on their shoulder, right? That they're the smallest generation, that they're sandwiched between the two big ones. Now, guess what? In the workplace, they're slinging a little bit of power around because they have it, because that's what they want to do. So what if some of this generational talk isn't just why people do the thing, but what if it's actually the thing that we are encouraging and creating to do? And so how do we get out of that? How do we get out of the what if, right? We lead with curiosity and not with judgment. Tell me more about what you're doing, right? We are hardwired as humans to want someone to do the thing the way we do it. We need to fold the towel the way we folded it. We needed to show up at work the way we do it. We need to lead a meeting the way we do it. You need to come into the office so I can see you do the work and I can get to know you face to face. We need people to do the things the way we do it, and we are hardwired to judge someone else in the way we do it. We are. It is our human nature. But what if we purposefully shift away from the judgment and shift into the curiosity? Why do you think that is, right? Why do you think that they enjoy being at lunch? Why do you think that your Generation Z worker watches their phone during lunch instead of sitting in the cafeteria or sitting at the lunch table? I see that conversation. I have a client, we just talked about it right now. They're like, should we ban phones at work? And they talk together. They're like, well, it's their lunch hour, right? They want to watch a Netflix show. They've never not been able to watch a Netflix show. They got TVs rolled into their classroom and watch shows in school, right? This is their downtime. But when we lead with, oh, God, they just don't want to get to know us, no, maybe they don't as much as the older generations do. Because guess what? They know they're not going to be there forever. And they have personal relationships outside of work that we didn't necessarily prioritize as the millennial, as the X, as the silent generation. And so what if we say, hey, tell me a little bit about the show that you watched at lunch. How was that? And what if we connect over what they enjoy doing instead of connecting over what they're not doing? How do we lead with curiosity and not with judgment? What would that look like? What if we did that? So we have to have a shift, right? We have to have a shift somewhere in our society, in our workplace, or this is not going to happen. Because what I'm going to tell you is, unfortunately, we do not have enough people to fill the jobs that we have. So we can talk about how people are lazy on the couch, how no one wants to work anymore, how Gen Z doesn't want to be in a workplace, how X, Bob, we can use any excuse under the book. But the final answer is simple math. There is not a human for every job that exists. And we have to figure out how to make sure we have humans and that we treat humans with respect. And we have to do that by having a shift. What is that shift that we need? It's a perspective shift. Right? It's a perspective shift from why is this person watching it at lunch, right? What is happening? We need to make sure that we are thinking, okay, they didn't grow up the same way that I did. They don't do the things that I do. Maybe they want to do something differently, and maybe it is wrong, or maybe it's not. Or as younger generations, maybe that silent generation or that boomer wants to tell you a huge story that's really long or give you advice about what you're doing. But guess what? They are scared because they are leaving work for the first time in 60 years. And they want to make sure that they have shared the knowledge with the generations behind them. And so what if our perspective isn't about why things are wrong, but it's about why things can be right? What can we share with each other? How can we make sure that we each have some mutual connection points and mutual agreements? And how do we do that, right? So how do we build across generations? This is what I think it looks like. I think it looks like allowing others the grace and space to be themselves, including socks. I'm sorry, I wear no-show socks. It is what it is. If you want to show your socks, go for it. But guess what? I was just talking to a client. I was like, tell me, I'm doing a generational story. Tell me a generational story. It was about socks. That was the first story that came up. They were at work and somebody's like, well, I know you're old because I don't see your socks. You have a no-show socks. And they had the, crew length socks. They also have a baby boomer in their office. The baby boomer happened to be walking by and they were like, hey, show us your socks. He pulled up his socks. His socks went to his knees, right? So I don't care how tall your socks are, right? We can allow people space and grace to do what works for them, right? So whether that is about socks, whether that is about how they send an email, right? We can build professionalism without building judgment as well, right? And then we need to allow grace and space to do the work. Or not to do some work, right? We all have realized that flexibility definitely helped us, right? Whether you were an aging parent, whether you wanted to go play golf on Friday afternoons, whether you were chasing a kid around a lacrosse field or a hockey rink like I am, that flexibility to work or not work when you choose was pretty helpful, right? And so we need to allow some grace and space. We also need to realize that capitalizing on work is not going to be every generation's priority. Right? Some of them are going to want to do their job and go home. Some of them are going to want to do their job and not really push for a promotion. And you know why some of them don't want to push for a promotion? Is because most of the younger generation, Gen Z, and it goes up into millennials, have some kind of side hustle or side business that they also are passionate about and want to work for. And so your job as a institution or organization is actually what's paying their bills and giving them insurance. But their lifeblood and their energy is coming from that other thing they're doing, right? And so it's okay for them to maybe not want to push themselves. That's hard for us to hear, especially from a generation that really valued work or that valued the power going into work and defined ourselves by our work and our work-life balance. We need to allow them to have the grace and space, right, to do it differently. Or maybe they're going to do it the same, right? But guess what? When a Generation Z worker comes in and does it the same as a Generation X worker did it, they didn't know you did it that way. So there's so many times we've heard in the workplace, oh, we tried that, it didn't work. Okay, but that was also 15 years ago. Let's maybe try that again. Or maybe they're going to do it a little bit differently, right? And that's okay too. So we need to allow them the grace and space, again, to do it differently and sometimes to do it the same. And I would say that crosses generations. As the younger generations, the Gen Zs, the younger millennials in the room, right? We need to allow the baby boomers to get to know technology, to get excited about some feature in PowerPoint that's been there for 10 years. That's okay, right? I get excited. I learned how to add an app on my computer, and I got excited, and I've been using a computer for a really long time, right? So it's okay for people to do things differently or the same, and we need to allow that grace and space. And then we want the grace and space for them to flail. I don't say fail because I think we overemphasize fail right now, right? If we do something wrong, we're like, oh, we got to get rid of failure. I mean, I sent a wrong email. I didn't fail, right? I just flailed a little bit, right? So allow them to flail and figure it out. Remember, especially Gen Z came from a little bit of a helicopter parent, if you look at stereotypically, right? Parents that were around, right? Because their parents maybe weren't around, so they wanted to do it differently. We all want to do it a little different than our parents did. And so they haven't flailed and figured it out as much, or they flail and figure it out in their personal lives, but really struggle to flail and figure it out in their professional lives. I used to work in Career Center at Virginia Tech, as we talked about, and we would talk about resumes a lot with students and a bunch of things. And we'd be like, oh, they'd ask us all these questions, or they'd say, how do I do this? I'm like, have you Googled it? And they're like, well, why would I Google it? Like, Googling is for finding a restaurant and like learning about no, actually, like the internet works for really fun professional stuff too, guys. So where they don't always make a connection between how they can figure it out in their personal life and that instantaneousness as in the professional life. And then we allow for grace and space to succeed, be it fast or slow. And the fast or slow is where we see the biggest challenges. This is why we see the entitlement. They're coming into this company and want to change everything and be CEO in 2 years. Yeah, they also ran a business out of their dorm room, right? Or they just want me to work here for 10 years before I can do anything. Well, yeah, this company's been around for 75. Like, you need to learn a little bit of processes and procedures and like the scope of this global company maybe a little bit before you start taking it over, right? So the perspective is both ways. And this is what's most important, is it's the perspective. And then in the end, what else can we do today, right? We want to ask questions and listen without judgment. So those of you that have a judgment resting face, I heard that word, I like that one way better than the other one, but a judgment resting face may need to kind of smile a little bit, right? When we're hearing the response. We want to make sure that we don't lose that institutional knowledge. So we want to make sure that if we can be curious about why they're doing, if we can educate without maybe insinuating we have to do it our way or they have to take our advice, eventually our institutional knowledge will be passed on. We want to communicate in multiple ways across the generations. So maybe we do call the person in that generation that is not as quick as email, right? Maybe we do send out especially important communications in our team through social media channels. But let's make sure we're doing that properly, because we know that social media is a little bit more accessible to certain people than others. Case in point, Amazon in Northern Virginia. Amazon, not just Northern Virginia, but especially in Northern Virginia recently, released their return to office policy online simultaneously from sending the correspondence within their company. So what happened? Who found out first? The people that are online all the time, right? And now you have senior leaderships who don't communicate in that way, that found out that return to office policy was changing in their company through the news, right? Wow. We need to make sure that, especially with big things, we are communicating in the ways that the generations understand, and that we are understanding how fast communications are happening right now. And so maybe we do send an email and call a few people and record a video and send it out, whatever that may be, because it gives the face-to-face. And you know what that does is that takes time and energy on us. And that's why we struggle to do it, because we are overworked, overstressed, and understaffed, right? And then finally, we need to allow everyone space to find their people. There's a good research on onlyness, right? And I think we think about onlyness in a lot of different ways. Maybe we are the only woman in the room. As an athletic trainer working with football teams, I was the only female on a bus, to the point that when someone would walk in and say, oh, there's a girl on the bus, I'd be like, where? Oh, it's me. That's right. Right? I've been the only at a lot of places. We have the only a lot in generations. They're the only Gen Z. Maybe you're the only one in the silent generation left. Maybe you're the only boomer. Right? That's okay. We just need to allow people to thrive in their onlyness. And we need to allow them to find who their people are, even if that doesn't look like who they think their people should be. We need to make sure that when they find their people, they will find their purpose and they will find their power. And why do we need that, right? We need that because we're all human. We need connection. We thrive in social organizations. We thrive in being shoulder to shoulder, taking on that work of someone. We started by digging in the ground next to someone, right? We started by foraging in the fields next to someone. We need to be next to someone when we're doing our work. We need to have creation. We need to have connection. In Gallup, the #1 indicator by research by Gallup about whether you are engaged and happy at work is that you have a best friend, one. We're not talking about building a huge village and a huge community, but we need to allow those that want to find their people to find their people. And it's okay if it's not us. It's okay if they don't want to sit with us at lunch. We need to let them find who they want to find, how they want to find it. And then we need to remember that innovation, that progress, that solutions, they come from people. They sometimes come from new people. They come from new ideas. Right? And those new ideas come from new people. Right? And right now, more than ever, we need new ideas. We need every single person that wants to go to work, because we already don't have enough. Right? So we need that. We need every single one. And so anything we can do to bridge the divide, to be connected, to communicate, right? To understand, to have perspective, to have empathy. As a leader, as a colleague, as an organization, we've got to do that. And so I'll challenge you today, as you leave, to have that perspective, to realize that leadership is changing, that empathy is going to get us out of this, and that comes from having a shift in our perspective of what is important to us and what we are going to maintain at work. So with that, thank you very much, and I'll open the floor to some questions. Any thoughts or questions? Or what questions do you have?
With studies that show that when we reach roughly the age of 35, we're relatively set in our ways, what are steps that we can take as a room full of people, not to age us very rapidly, all being above that, to make ourselves more open and willing to adjust to the younger generation versus necessarily the younger generation always adjusting to us?
Yeah, I love that question. I mean, I think first is it's that perspective, is that we don't have to have them adjust to us, and that we can adjust a little bit, and that we have to know we're set in our ways, and we're set in our ways because they worked. Especially if you're here, right? You were successful. You saw success. It worked in the way that you did it. And so I think it goes back to some of the curiosity, right? Talking to folks across generations, developing, studying it, and seeing, okay, why is it the way it's done? And then realizing that just because we're set in our ways doesn't mean we can't change and adapt. And what will happen as those 35-year-olds become different generations of 35 and 50-year-olds, right, especially over the next 5 or 10 years, and different levels of leadership in your organizations, is that actually that adaptation and that want for change is going to start to increase. And we have to know that that's going to make some people uncomfortable, right? I know we need to stand at the edge of discomfort, right? Like that is one of the things I preach, is that we need to stand at the edge of our comfort zone so that we can get uncomfortable, so that we can grow. What we have to realize is that the edge of that comfort zone is going to be different for different people, right? And so if you say, hey, we have a new software, there's going to be some people that might need a boatload of training, and there's going to be people that it's their the fifth software they've done, and so they're going to be able to jump right in. And so I think it's leading with that curiosity and training would be my, yeah. Yes?
Can we talk about, I'm sure we're all feeling it, I know I am, but feeling this, I'm a millennial, so I'm feeling this sense of people not wanting the generation underneath us and feeling like they don't want to commit to work, and like how we encourage them to either commit to work or find a way to adapt to that, because I feel like retention is harder with that.
Absolutely, retention is harder. And so the question was about, as like the Generation Z entering the workforce, how do we kind of encourage some more commitment to work and retaining our employees? Yeah, that's a great question. I think that there's going to be some national socioeconomic factors that are going to help us with that, right? Remember, this generation entered work during the Great Resignation. And I don't love that word, Great Resignation, because people weren't just resigning to go to like Bora Bora and chill on the beach, right? Like they were finding other jobs that met their work-life balance better, or that met their needs, or that met their salaries, or where they could work remotely. There's a lot during, especially in digital marketing, anyone that's in digital marketing, people were working 2 jobs because they could remotely, right? And trying to bank 2 salaries for a little bit. So it's not that I don't think the Gen Z wants to not work at all. They just view work very differently than we do. And they want some flexibility and adaptability. And they really, I think this will change, but right now, the stereotype of that generation is that salary is least important. And we are seeing that in the retention problem. And I know I do leadership development, I promise this isn't it, but offering leadership development and training is a big part of retaining this Generation Z. And it doesn't have to be true leadership development, right? It can be professional development where they gain a new skill, where you let them go to a community college and give them time to get a new certification. And so this commitment to growing them feels a little counterintuitive, but it's one of the best ways to retain them. Because if they know they're continuing to grow marketable skills with you, they're actually less likely to go take those marketable skills elsewhere. And so I think some of it is that this is right now, there are more jobs than people, so they feel very confident and comfortable to go leave and find a different job. They came, again, of age in an era where they were pretty financially stable. Yes, there's a lot of debt, but people are talking about it, and there was programs for it, unlike the millennial generation. And so I do think it is commitment to training. It is going back to the things that they value and allowing them that space to work in ways that they may want to, even if it doesn't look like the way we would want them to work. Yeah.
Back onto that, I recently had to let someone go because she missed 10 days of work since the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
And I feel like to a lot of us in the room, that's like, I don't even take 10 days in a whole year. So
Yeah.
for me, what I hear you say is maybe we need to adjust.
You could.
Like, do I need to allow people to take more time off? Like,
I mean, I think not to do this, but it depends, right? Like, so there's certain industries where that is feasible. We were just having a conversation on our table. One client I work with firmly believes in in-person work, firmly believe it. But they started realizing that people were working on the weekends and they were losing people because they're like, well, I'm in the office and talking all the time, I don't get my job done. So they started giving them admin days on top of their PTO, which is basically their work from home days. And so they were finding they were burning less people out when they could work from home once or twice a month or for a weekend, right? And so I think it depends on the industry you're in, not knowing that, right? Sometimes you have to show up. Like, you can't nurse always by phone. You can't doctor always by phone, right? You can't build a car, right, by phone. I mean, maybe soon you'll be able to do it through a robot, but right now we can't in every single bit. There are jobs we have to show up to, right? And then there are certain aspects of our jobs that maybe we don't have to show up to. Is 10 days acceptable? Not if it was clearly explained and the expectations were clearly set. Then I say yes, we do. Our turnover is going to be perpetually higher. That is, it has not gone down. Just saw a most recent employee engagement survey. Employee engagement has dropped again now in the most recent survey of employee engagement. So I do think we are going to continue to have turnover. But what does that look like for you? And then one thing that I'm seeing a lot of employers shift is away from hiring full-time employees, and they're hiring them as 1099 employees through their own companies and through these entrepreneurships, and then they're supplementing one full-time position with 2 part-time people, and everyone's happier. I don't know if that's possible in your industry, but I'm seeing that across the industry. Yeah. What other thoughts or questions? All right. Do I turn it back over? All right. Thank you.
Well, thank you all again for joining us, and thank you to our sponsor, Automation Creations, Inc., and to our wonderful speaker, Katie Beach with Mojo Leadership. Our next Eggs and Issues will be on infrastructure in the New River Valley on July 10th. You can sign up on the website. Thank you all for coming. Hope you have a great day.